Welcome to Cuba, a country which since 1959 has stood as an island of defiance against the power of the United States. Today, that defiance is looking threadbare. The economy is on the brink of collapse as its political regime finds itself in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. Tonight, we report inside Cuba on a country in crisis.
Cuba's a mess. It's a failing country.
The center of Havana is plunged into darkness once again.
There are many things that need fuel to function, and we don't have it.
This is the intensive care unit, where you would expect to have an awful lot of drugs, but as you can see, a lot of these are empty.
The president who changed Cuba, well, that he likes the sound of.
We are willing to fight.
I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba.
Coming up on this special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Stuart Ramsey goes undercover inside Cuba's hospitals where facilities once considered world-class have become empty symbols of decay. Blackouts and food shortages are now part of everyday life for many Cubans living on the edge. We look at what is driving the economic collapse.
Everyone who lives here tells us it's getting worse since the fuel blockade imposed by President Trump on Cuba has really kicked in.
I've spoken exclusively to the president of Cuba, who's admitted making mistakes, but is defiant against Donald Trump's threats.
We are willing to fight to the very last drop of blood.
People I've been speaking to here who are struggling for the basics tell me who they hold responsible.
Yes, of course it's Donald Trump's fault, because he doesn't allow fuel into the country. He's sanctioning all the countries that are trying to help us.
And as Donald Trump weighs up a new foreign policy intervention here, we get inside the heads of Cuban-Americans in the United States. If there's one part of Cuba that stands as a metaphor for the profound collapse of the state and its ability to provide for its citizens, it's the healthcare system. Once regarded as amongst the best in the world, used in so-called healthcare diplomacy to project Cuban power, it's now in disarray, struggling to provide even basic treatment and care. Our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey and his team have reported inside Cuba as the crisis escalated throughout this year. They spent a week reporting undercover inside Cuban hospitals. Here's what they found.
At first sight, this looks like an almost abandoned government building, but it's actually a cancer hospital in the Cuban city of Santa Clara. It's barely functioning, though. Waiting rooms are virtually shut down. There are locks on doors. Its pharmacy is closed. The whole clinic is in disrepair. The store for oxygen is crumbling and neglected. Through a locked gate, we glimpse a selection of ancient canisters. Cuba was once famous for its treatment of cancer patients. Now the patients wait for treatment. That is more likely never coming. For over a week, Sky News filmed undercover in cities and towns across Cuba. We wanted to see what's happening to the country's once renowned health service. The authorities don't want the world, or more importantly, its own people, to learn this simple truth. It's disintegrating, like the whole of the country. The Arnaldo Milan Castro General Hospital in Santa Clara is another major facility struggling to function. The cover of darkness assists our arrival. What is really striking is how the hospital has to prioritize power for certain sections and certain wards. Much of the hospital is in total darkness. Corridors are eerily quiet in departments that appear to be mothballed to save power. Along one corridor, alongside the critical care unit, a man wheels a hospital gurney towards a ward. It's piled high with food and supplies. His elderly relative follows behind in a wheelchair. In every ward, families keep their loved ones company. It seems that there's always a member of the family on duty into the night, making sure the patient has what they need. It's not pleasant inside. Gloomy toilets are filthy. There's a feeling that nothing much works. One hospital worker we filmed anonymously said the health system has stopped working, so they're dependent on the black market for all supplies.
On the street, you can get anything. So people buy it, and relatives bring it from the outside. The doctors ask you to find this, to find that, for them to operate on a patient, because they don't have the instruments. They have the will, but there are no instruments. They want to help you, but there aren't any.
In the hospital grounds, past the morgue, we find piles of discarded rubbish. Alongside it, more piles of spent supplies and equipment. Basic health management and cleanliness rules seem to have stopped or been abandoned at this hospital in the face of crippling state failure and sanctions. A few hours away in the city of Matanzas is the Faustino Perez General Hospital. It's a huge hospital, once capable of treating 700 inpatients. I've come to see Dr. Laudalino Fernandez, the head of the emergency department. He's been here for over 30 years, and he showed me round. Dr. Fernandez doesn't blame the government for the crisis. Quite the opposite. He blames decades of sanctions and President Trump's blockade.
What the doctors are saying is that even if they have a lack of drugs, they still let people come in because they're determined to treatment, even if they know they're fighting perhaps even a losing battle, but they feel determined to keep providing health care for everyone who goes.
There are vast corridors and staff wandering about, but it doesn't feel that much is really going on. The main problem the staff have is the basic lack of supplies.
This is your fluids, yeah? That's all of it. Also, for a hospital that had over 300 patients, have got that much water left. Sterile water. And syringes. And so that's it. And that's basically bare. Yeah. And that's the supplies for the whole of the emergency section.
Clearly, the current oil embargo, the government's own lack of investment and mismanagement, and years of US sanctions have finally combined to crush the health service's ability to properly care for its population.
If the oil embargo continues, the level of medicine becomes more difficult. When we go into a season of high diseases like malaria or chikungunya or even COVID, are you worried that it's going to be very difficult this year to treat people?
Now, the blockade does put us up against the wall. But despite that, you are seeing a fully working hospital, a large hospital working, operating, sometimes with more things, sometimes with less. But we try to carry on, looking for solutions from the inside and through friends.
The old and the very young are always the most vulnerable. Outside the Mariana Griales Maternity Hospital in the city of Santa Clara, families arrive with food and essential supplies for the expectant mothers and their soon-to-be-born babies. The hospitals simply don't have the resources to provide anything but their medical knowledge. Entry into this maternity hospital is extremely restricted, so our filming had to be very discreet. In a crowded ward, pregnant women lie on beds, grateful for the meagre coolness of small fans. There's no aircon here. Like so many of the hospitals we visited, just getting by is the best anyone can hope for. There is a sense Cuba is now at a crossroads, but nobody has any idea which direction the country will take, or what kind of future the next generation will be born into. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Cuba.
Well, this is not just healthcare that's in disarray. This is a country with widespread and regular blackouts. So what's being done to manage this crisis? I've spoken exclusively to the president of Cuba here in Havana. It's the first interview he's given to a British broadcaster since entering power. And I asked him about the decay visible everywhere in his country. I have been, Mr. President, in Havana for the last few days. I've seen the impact of the blockade on your country, the fuel shortages, the hospitals that are struggling. We've seen piles of rubbish throughout the city. It's been incredibly difficult to see how difficult the suffering of the people here has been. And I appreciate that you will say that the bulk of this is because of the blockade. But people that I've been speaking to have also been saying it's not entirely Washington's fault, that it's also your fault. What responsibility do you take for the suffering of your people?
We've always recognized the mistakes we've made, and the revolution has constantly been self-critical, and as part of that criticism shared with the people, we've been overcoming problems. What happens is that we are going through a very exceptional situation. We've been under the blockade for 60 years. It is the longest-running blockade in the history of mankind, and it's not just any blockade. It is an economic, financial, commercial blockade, and now an energy blockade. And this blockade is not being imposed by any country. It is being imposed by the mightiest power in the world. And we recognize that we've made mistakes. For example, we were waiting for a better time in order to introduce a number of measures that could improve the economy. We were waiting.
And I've seen the 200 reforms.
Even like this, these measures are going to find a difficult time to be implemented because of the blockade, because there's not going to be more fuel because we're up.
Well, many economists, you've put into place. You've put into place.
If we are so incapable,
you've put into place.
Why don't they lift the blockade? Lift the blockade and let's see how the chips may fall. If we are that incapable, if we are that incompetent, if we are so unable to develop our country, don't blockade me. Why are you blocking me?
But are they supporting the Cuban economy now? Because I'm speaking to people who are saying their monthly salary is like $14 a month or $20 a month. You know, when you talk about the Cuban economy, it is crumbling.
We have inflation. There is an imbalance in terms of the purchasing power and the salaries because we're going through a crisis. We've been condemned to an economic crisis. They're trying to suffocate and stifle our economy.
You've acknowledged that it's not just the blockade. You have acknowledged this to your party. You have said that there are factors that are internal that are not linked to the blockade. What examples do you have here?
The impact on everyday life by the blockade, because those mistakes that we have recognized and we have overcome at other times in our lives, and we've been able to achieve social achievements and that the United States don't have. The level of participation, the level in healthcare, the level of education and higher education that we have, the level of equality that we've been able to achieve. What happens is that this U.S. policy is criminal. We're talking about a genocidal policy.
So you don't take responsibility for the policies that have existed in this country for decades that have left you vulnerable so that when this sort of blockade, these sanctions are imposed, you have a system that hasn't allowed your market to open up?
Our policies have been successful because if we've been able to survive in spite of the blockade, that's because our policies are effective. What happens is, why are they going to tell us that the aspiration should be the market? Who said that the market is going to ensure equality and social justice?
The Cuban president, and we'll have more of that interview in a moment, but let's bring in our Stuart Ramsey. And Stuart, a rare admission there from the Cuban president that they have made mistakes, but he continues to point the finger of blame at Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he does have a point. Certainly since the beginning of this year, this fuel blockade has been pretty disastrous for the country, and it's definitely got worse. And a couple of times that I was there, and I'm sure you've seen it's even worse now that you're there as well, as it was just sort of 6-7 months ago. So things are bad. But you're absolutely right. While he has made an admission of some errors perhaps in the past, and that they have made overtures, by the way, to the United States, saying that they are going to relax some of their stronger principles, communist principles. They will allow some private banking. They will allow investment in the country. And they will allow some private business, though our understanding so far is that the United States is not impressed. The point is, there's been terrible misfunding. If you just look at the health service, which we went to look at very specifically, once one of the leading examples to the world of how well it can be run. But there's ample evidence to show that it stopped being funding, leading it to the state that it's in now. And that funding was stopped some time ago when they decided to spend a lot of money on developing the tourism business. What we're told from people in Cuba, almost directly removed from the health service, which I say was renowned throughout the world. So the Cuban government does have to take considerable responsibility for some of its own mishandling and mismanagement of the economy and, in fact, entire society going over decades. But, however, as the president did point out, there has been this blockade in various forms throughout 6 decades, and then particularly from the start of this year, this really critically difficult blockade about energy, because the country is so dependent on oil, and it's getting virtually none from anywhere right now.
Stuart, thank you so much for now. So hospitals are a scene of crisis for Cubans needing emergency help. But such are the problems facing Cuba that even everyday life has become a source of anxiety and fear, as Stuart found as he travelled around this country.
The centre of Havana is plunged into darkness once again. The Cuban government doesn't have enough oil to keep its power grid working. It has no choice but to switch it off. Even the capital can be no longer spared. If there are lights, they come from car batteries or saved-up solar energy. Remember, these are some of Havana's main districts. They've never been deprived of electricity like this before. A Cuba powerless to provide its people with power. Illuminated by headlights or with torches, people prepare for an early night. When the night falls now, normal life is suspended. Just because it's daylight doesn't mean there's power. Some of the power cuts last for days at a time. There's a growing food shortage now, and people are desperate. Through rubbish bins, they search for anything of value and anything worth eating. Some collected in bags, slowly working their way through the mound of rubbish, seeking out discarded fruit and vegetables rotting beneath the blistering sun, sifting out what they can scavenge from here. These aren't homeless people, they're desperate people. Others can't wait, inspecting the food, then eating it. It's that desperate. There's been incredible poverty here in Cuba for a long time, but this type of open, desperate need hasn't existed here for many years. And the streets of the capital don't usually look like this.
What people have been telling me is that the streets of Havana are famous for always being really clean, even though the people are really poor. But things have got worse, and as a lady was just explaining to me, this is here because the normal refuse people, the bin men, haven't got petrol to actually come and pick up the rubbish. So I've passed out lots of street corners and it's like this. Hours-long queues form outside barely functioning government-controlled bakeries. They're limited to one piece of bread per person when there is any to be had. We found that the government's bodega stores that once provided cheap essentials like rice and cooking oil are basically shut or empty. Barely anything on the shelves. Pharmacies as well have just empty shelves. This one appears to be open, but it seems there's virtually nothing in stock.
Please help me with one milk here.
On the street, a man approached me, asking for paracetamol.
I'm an English teacher. I teach a teenager in high school. But we have very few possibilities to buy new shops, because the new market is, we can't afford. I mean, the people who live like me, like a wage, my income is 2,500 pesos like a teacher, and I can't afford to buy a new shop.
The tourism industry that brought billions of dollars of foreign currency into the country has dwindled. The once bustling tourist centres in Havana are virtually empty. This is economic warfare every bit as destructive to life here as bombs and bullets would be. There's little traffic on Cuba's motorways. There's little fuel to be had, so nobody moves unless it's absolutely essential. We travelled a couple of hours outside the capital, Havana, mainly passing horse-drawn carts or slow-moving motorcycles and scooters. This is a farming community in the region of Pinar del Rio, the centre of tobacco production and Cuban cigars. When we arrived, the power cut was already 2 days old. At sunset, many climb onto their rooftops looking for signal, though there is barely any. The reality of life during this fuel blockade is summed up by the darkness, by the grinding monotony of living without the appliances of modern life. In many ways, Cuba goes back in time every single night. We'd invite you to kind of meet a family who live in this apartment block. Some of them have lights. It's solar power or batteries that they've got. They're on about the 3rd floor, I think, of this apartment. This is their electricity meters. They're not doing anything. Eventually, they're completely stationary. There's no power on at all. Oscar is a physics and maths teacher. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he's rigged up a system to keep the lights on at home. It's a short-term fix, but it's effective. Oscar and his wife Lise, an English teacher, live here with their son. Oscar takes home about £10 a month as a teacher. All government wages are poor, so he holds down 3 other jobs to try to make ends meet. They're not happy with their lives, but they don't see Donald Trump as their saviour. They prefer Cuba to do better, and the American blockade is making things worse.
Before the Trump administration, we had problems, but this has been worse, much worse in every way. Transportation, growing food, the blackouts have also increased. It's very difficult to keep food in the refrigerator. I have to buy food every day. Do you see what I mean? So it's been a lot harder, like never before, a lot worse.
By morning, the community slowly awakes. Another night without power gives way to another day without power. It's relentless. Cuba's chronic mismanagement and the neglect of infrastructure over decades contributes to this situation. But years of US sanctions and President Trump's current oil blockade are making the problems in Cuba more acute now. After Venezuela and Iran, President Trump says Cuba is next. Nobody here knows what next means, or whether it will make things even worse, if that is possible.
Well, President Trump has been explicit in his desire to take control of Cuba, a threat that he repeated last night. He spoke about one of his predecessors, Theodore Roosevelt, who, before he was president, fought in a war that saw the US seize Cuba and other territories from Spain.
Soon after, they relinquished their grip on Cuba and Guam, the Philippines and Puerto Rico, and they were all ours. We got them all. And speaking of Cuba, after many, many decades, it's coming our way. Coming our way.
Well, I put that new warning from Donald Trump to the Cuban president. Have a listen. The US President Donald Trump has been speaking in the last few hours, and he's been talking about Cuba. He says after many, many decades, it's coming our way. He continues to talk about taking Cuba. He is continuing to make threats against your government. I just want you to react to his latest statements.
Threats, the constant rhetoric of about an aggression against our country by the U.S. government, the almost daily expressions which are part of a strategy of a media-driven intoxication and psychological warfare in order to frighten our country and destabilize our society is an outrage and an affront to the dignity of our people. And they're also a flagrant violation of international law. Firstly, Cuba is a sovereign country. Cuba achieved its independence after more than 100 years of struggle, first against Spanish colonialism, and then after the U.S. intervention and the country's dependence on the U.S. government as a neo-colony. We have embraced a cause, and we're trying to build a model which is our own. We are not going to impose it on anyone else, but this is the way we want to develop our country. We are a peaceful country. We are not a threat to anyone. We provide a lot of solidarity to the world. Therefore, Cuba is not a nation in conflict. We're not a colony. We're not going to give in our sovereignty or independence. These are principles that we must preserve and uphold. Therefore, we believe that it is there is an exaggeration. There are no moral or legal authority on any ruler from the United States in order to impose a policy that seeks to attack Cuba or take over Cuba.
But do you believe they are going to use force and an attack is imminent?
That would be speculating, because there's a mixture of political interests. The current U.S. administration is deeply committed to the Miami-based Cuban mafia, and therefore they're playing to their electorate base. And we are close to elections in the U.S., and they're trying to be condescending and playing to the interests of those voters. So you have those political interests. On the other hand, there is a lot of rhetoric, there is a lot of manipulation, and what's clear for us is that there is a threat. I wouldn't be able to tell you whether they're going to go with it or not, but there is a threat, and it is an asymmetrical threat. You have the United States, which is playing the role of the aggressor, and the United States is escalating its rhetoric about threats and a potential intervention. And that puts us in alert. If there is an attack, the Cuban people will respond in unity, firmness, and in defense of our sovereignty. We don't want the war, but we're not afraid of it, and we are getting ready so that we're not surprised or defeated.
And we can talk about how you're getting ready in a moment, but we have seen a military buildup off your coast. When Donald Trump has threatened Venezuela, for example, he has acted. When he has threatened Iran, he has acted. I know you're saying that me asking whether an attack being imminent is hypothetical, but we've seen in the past when he has said something, he has done it. Are you taking what he is saying seriously when he says we can take Cuba?
We need to move away from confrontation for the sake of both our peoples. I think that the American people, for which we are respectful, and the Cuban people can have a wonderful relationship as very good neighbors because we're very close to each other. And we can share, as has been proved at other times when relations have been at a more favorable situation, we can have many shared projects and businesses and art and education and culture, scientific research. There are so many common areas that could be addressed jointly and also as peoples. We don't like to be compared with what has happened elsewhere because that would be tantamount to ignoring our history and not knowing the strength of our institution and the sense of unity in our people and the sense of appreciation of our sovereignty and independence.
How, you say you're getting ready militarily because you're taking this threat seriously. How are you getting ready, and do you honestly think you can take on the might of the US military, given it is the most powerful military in the world?
Fidel taught us that there are no invincible enemies, and there may be very powerful armies, technologically speaking. There might be even powerful armies numerically, but also in conflicts there is convictions and the decisions made by the peoples and the sacrifices. I, like many other million Cubans, are willing to give our lives for the revolution, and we are willing to fight to the very last drop of blood in order to defend our rights, and our independence, our sovereignty, and our achievements.
Let's go to Washington and speak to our US correspondent, David Blevins. David, we're just listening there to the Cuban president, who remains incredibly defiant. And of course, Donald Trump continues his almost weekly threats against Cuba.
Yes, the president has talked repeatedly about taking Cuba. That's the sort of language he uses. He says it would be an honor for him to do so. And his administration here in Washington justifies that threat on the basis of national security. People like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, for example, a Cuban-American himself, potential future candidate for the US presidency, will tell you that Cuba's government cooperates too closely with US rivals, China and Russia, and therefore poses a security threat. But Trump's stance on Cuba really reflects his wider foreign policy, expanding US influence in the Western Hemisphere, what this president calls our hemisphere. But there could be domestic politics in play too, because taking a hard line on Cuba goes down very well with the Cuban-American community, particularly in states like Florida, where the president spends a lot of his time, is influenced by people, and it is midterm election year, those elections being referred to by the Cuban president during your interview with him. Now, many people believe that by making these threats, the president is simply trying to pressure Havana into concessions. That rhetoric is very different to an actual invasion plan. But there are those who believe he is seriously weighing up his military options and could actually strike Cuba to deflect from what's going on in Iran. And remember this, he didn't seek the approval of Congress to invade Venezuela. He didn't seek the approval of Congress to invade Iran, and appears completely undeterred by the quagmire that has turned into. So he's very unlikely to seek the approval of Congress if he chooses to target Cuba next.
David, thank you so much. For decades, Cuba stood as an open wound in the Cold War and brought the United States and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear war. US trade embargoes on Cuba have been in place for generations. But under Donald Trump, the island has become the focus of an aggressive maximum pressure campaign, which have badly compounded Cuba's existing problems. Here's Olive Enokido-Lynham from the Sky News Explains team.
Cuba's energy crisis is affecting almost every aspect of daily life. Severe power outages have plunged the island into darkness, disrupting everything from healthcare to food supplies. But how did we get here? Much of Cuba's energy system was designed and engineered in the Soviet era. For years, Cuba's government's been criticised for failing to modernise it. It's not just the infrastructure that's the problem, though, but what the system relies on. The island gets over 80% of its total energy supply from oil, making it extremely reliant on foreign imports. If you take a look at this graph, the main countries providing Cuba with oil include Algeria, Russia, and Mexico, but its most important supplier is Venezuela. That relationship, though, has been strained since the US launched a huge military raid and removed Venezuela's leader in January. But that's not the end of Cuba's oil problem. After intervention in Venezuela, Donald Trump said countries supplying oil to Cuba could face US tariffs. All of this has had a massive knock-on effect on Cuba's energy supply. If you take a look here, you can see that there's only been one major oil import since January. That was from a single Russian oil tanker that Trump did allow in. The tanker was carrying over 700,000 barrels of oil, which sounds like a lot, but it's enough to fuel the country for about a week. It also shows that no oil was imported to Cuba last month. That US oil blockade has had a devastating impact on the people living in Cuba. Some people have been left without power for up to 22 hours a day. And the energy crisis we're seeing today is on top of decades of US sanctions. That includes a trade embargo that was introduced in 1962 and is still in place today. Washington and Havana have a long and complex history. The Cuban Revolution brought communism to the island and has shaped the country's relationship with the US. Now, under Donald Trump, it's clear that the US is still not budging, even though conditions on the island are getting worse. The UN says that more than 100,000 patients are waiting for delayed surgeries due to power and supply shortages. Cuba's water system relies heavily on fuel too, and nearly 3 million Cubans are living with daily water shortages. Cuba's president says his government has made mistakes, but that a lot of the issues are down to the US blockade. Washington says the blockade is aimed at the Cuban government, but with increasing humanitarian concerns, it doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon. Yet, it's the Cuban people who are paying the biggest price.
It's hard, though, for any data to truly capture the challenges facing Cubans as they go about their everyday life. I've been speaking to people living through this crisis. The first thing you notice about Havana isn't the crisis. It's life. Children play in the streets, neighbors gather outside their homes, a bride and groom glide past in a classic American car. For a moment, the city feels almost untouched. But look a little closer, and another picture emerges. All over the city and in every neighborhood, you see these piles and piles of rubbish. It's because the waste collection system is struggling in this country, and there is a fuel shortage, which means the rubbish trucks can't come and collect this. They used to be able to every few days. Now I'm being told that this could sit here for up to a month. And residents are worried. They're worried that they're living amongst rats and mosquitoes, and this could cause a disease. The stench also hits you quite hard. Anna is 72 years old. She's lived here for more than 30 years. Now her day revolves around electricity. When the power returns, often for little more than an hour, she has just enough time to pump water, charge her phone, and cook before the lights go out again. Wow, no electricity. She blames the US embargo.
Claro, si tiene la culpa. Yes, of course it's Donald Trump's fault, because he doesn't allow fuel into the country. He's sanctioning all the countries that are trying to help us. Businesses are afraid, so what happens? The items that we need to come into the country don't arrive.
Across Havana, the same strain is visible inside the city's hospitals. Medicines are scarce, equipment is aging. Dr. Roberto Balmaceda Manent has been caring for patients for almost 5 decades. He told us he's never known conditions this difficult. Still, he says his patients need him.
We're able to work, but given the challenges we resolve on a daily basis, we have to rely on Cuban ingenuity. The experience of our doctors working here has led to innovations and solutions to ensure that we can provide the necessary treatment for patients.
The pressure is felt in the markets too. Prices keep rising. Customers have less to spend. Niorca, a trader, tells us people buy only what they absolutely need. Are people coming and are they able to buy your products?
We have a fair number of customers, but it has dropped off. It's tough because with businesses closed, people aren't buying. But people are buying food every day because they can't keep anything cool. We always sell something.
The government blames decades of US sanctions. Critics blame years of economic mismanagement. For ordinary Cubans, the consequences are impossible to escape. More than 1.5 million Cubans have emigrated to the US since 1959. What do Cuban-Americans make of Trump's policies that are bringing their homeland to its knees? Mark Stone went to Tampa, Florida to find out.
Ybor, a neighborhood of Tampa, but it's not the Florida you might imagine. The culture here is Latin, the industry cigars, and the roots mostly Cuban. Even the famous street birds are, they say, descendants of Cuban chickens.
My name is Patrick Manteiga.
The Manteiga family roots here are deep. Son, father, and grandfather before him.
I'm the third-generation publisher of La Gaceta newspaper. It was founded in 1922 by my grandfather, Victoriano, who immigrated to Tampa in 1913 from Cuba. I don't think a lot of people understand that the word Cuban-American has a lot of different meanings here in America. If you're a Cuban-American whose family came over before 1959, 1960, you love Kennedy, you're a Democrat, Fidel Castro's not your issue every day. If you're a Cuban who came over from 1959 to 1970, you're a Republican, you hate John F. Kennedy, and you're eaten up by revenge and anger on the Castro regime. If you are somebody who came in after that, you probably still have family there, and you're probably very concerned about how that family is doing there.
Here's the divide.
Stop killing Cubans!
In Washington, Trump's Cuban-American Secretary of State heckled.
Marco Rubio is murdering his own people. He's never been to Cuba.
The administration's blockade policy to squeeze Cuba into submission or collapse, well, Marco Rubio is the architect behind that.
It's very sad in Cuba. The issue is that why is it sad? What is causing this? Our American administration wants you to believe it's all the mistakes of Cuba. It's bad leadership, it's bad this, it's bad that. And I'm not going to defend the Cuban administration and government, but I will tell you that after understanding US-Cuba policy, that I don't think there's any country in the world that could survive and have any prosperity under what the US is currently doing to Cuba and has done to Cuba since the embargo was placed in the mid-60s.
That decades-long embargo has shaped the history here. The cigar factories are in this town because of its proximity to Cuba. The workers are Cuban-American, but the tobacco no longer, not since the 1960s.
There is little evidence that Donald Trump cares particularly about Cuba or Cubans, but to be the president who changed Cuba, well, that he likes the sound of. And the votes of those Cubans who live here, of course.
Up the road at the wholesale fruit market, business seems good. And support for President Trump, well, we found that to be strong.
Cubans love Donald Trump.
You know, his policy is punishing everyone in Cuba.
The people I know, people they don't care if they're gonna break free. They don't care. They don't care for the punishment.
It's a price worth paying.
Of course, yes, yes.
So you'll vote for Trump?
Yes, I did.
And again?
Yeah, I will.
A mixture of hope, then, with a sense that anything must be better than a status quo that's endured for so many decades.
I have family in Cuba that have suffered greatly due to this dictatorship. And just like Venezuela and all the people and citizens of Venezuela who have honestly had such a great outlook and positive view on what's happened, I think it's going to be the same thing for Cuba personally.
Tampa's politics is fascinating because it's not quite the same as much of Florida. The vote is tighter here. Trump won in 2024 in Tampa, but in 2020, Biden won. In 2016, it was Clinton, against the grain of this Republican-red state.
On 7th Street, the Dirty Shame is the local hangout, where I found Victor De Mayo, a local lobbyist, passionate Democrat, proud Cuban-American, and no fan of Trump.
I was fortunate to go on a very historic trip when President Obama opened up Cuba for the first time in many, many decades.
2016.
And yes, I actually sat there in Cuba with President Obama and Raul Castro. It was a wonderful period for Cuba.
It's a reminder for sure of a different time. So what will happen this time?
I really don't think Marco Rubio knows. I don't think Donald Trump knows. I think if they go in there to Cuba to do what exactly? It's not going to be Venezuela.
It's going to be more like Iran than Venezuela.
Yes. The United States is very good about dropping bombs, but they're very bad about winning the hearts and minds of the people.
Yeah.
Well, 5 years ago, Cuba witnessed widespread protests that saw many people arrested and detained, heightening long-standing concerns from human rights groups about abuses by the government. I asked the Cuban president about this. Mr. President, I want to ask you about some reports that Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch have done. They've said that dissent in Cuba is met with harassment, criminalization, violence, house arrest and torture. Marco Rubio has made a point of this and says you repress anyone who dares to complain. I just want to ask you about several hundred political prisoners and activist journalists who remain in prison from the protests that took place a few years ago. There are those who have put banners up and have been arrested. I want to ask you about some of these specific cases and the human rights concerns in this country. So for example, I want to ask about Leonard Richard Gonzalez Alfonso. He's in prison. He's serving seven years for putting up a poster in the city. Why is he in prison?
You're in Cuba and you can find other points of view. This is also something that has been very manipulated. And there is a narrative construct for many years against the revolution in order to discredit the Cuban revolution. In Cuba, there are no political prisoners. In Cuba, the people who are serving prison terms are not serving those terms, not because they are in favor or not against the revolution, but they have committed offenses in our criminal code, in our civil code. But in Cuba, I can tell you that no one is in jail because their ideas are against the revolution, because we are fully aware that not all of the population is in favor of the revolution. But we do not allow that anyone, on the basis that they're against the revolution, commit acts of vandalism.
That's my interview there with the Cuban president. Let's return now to Stuart Ramsey. And Stuart, just talking there to the president, rare insight into the minds of this regime here that's deeply entrenched. And whether you raise the economy or human rights, it doesn't feel like they want to make fundamental changes. But the question is, do they have a choice?
They may have no choice. It depends what President Trump does. I think you're right. The government itself is determined to continue the revolution. It is making overtures in some form to the citizens to try and allow some privatisation. I mentioned that a little earlier, and there is hope that there will be investment from outside the country as well, and the government has welcomed that. But the government has said it is their choice who will run the country. It's got nothing to do with the United States, and that's the position they will take, even if they have to fight to defend themselves. I'm sure you found as well,
Yalda, that many people, there are many people who really would like President Trump to come in and just take over, but there's most, I would say, are very proud Cubans and actually believe in self-determination. They would like economic changes, for certain, but they're actually very proud of their country and they want to be in charge of the future for themselves, however that may be. Of course, there is this one issue, whatever the president says, people are imprisoned for political crimes, and you only have to be there to know that it is a police state, the Secret Service absolutely everywhere, and they are in control of everyone, though there is a sense that that is waning. But genuinely speaking, from many, many people I spoke to, is they believe in Cuba, they want to have self-determination in the future.
Stuart, thank you as always. Well, being here in Cuba, the pressures of economic hardship are impossible to ignore. But as we've heard, opinions are divided over who's to blame. Decades of US sanctions and the current blockade have inflicted untold damage, but so too have the government's economic policies and political repression. Whatever the balances of those forces, it is the Cuban people who continue to live with the consequences, and the worst may be far from over. Well, let's pick up with Stuart Ramsey and what we've just heard throughout this special programme. Stuart, really good to speak to you again. You've been reporting from Cuba for some time. Just give us a sense of, I have seen one side of Cuba, and the fact is I've seen the impact of the blockade, the blackouts, the sanction. But you've been coming here for some time. Has it dramatically deteriorated in recent times?
Yeah, I'd say that it has a lot, and actually really, really quickly. When this current Trump embargo was put in place, the country was not doing well. It had done very well under President Obama and was really bringing in a large number of tourists and the billions of dollars of cash that they brought with them, which the country needs. Then President Trump came in his first term and things went downhill straight away. It's been tough for them, but definitely since the beginning of this year, things have got worse. And I was quite surprised. I had one visit and then visited, and then a month or so later, and it had dramatically deteriorated. We went from seeing day-long power outages to multiple day-long power outages, not just around the country, but also in the centre of Havana. And that's definitely getting worse even now. And as we've seen in the reporting across the city of Havana, but in other parts as well, it's literally crumbling apart. Every sector is falling apart, and the health service, which you would expect to be one that they would support the most, is completely falling apart. And as the doctor was saying to you, and the doctor I spoke to said exactly the same, it's the ingenuity of the doctors and the medical staff in those hospitals that keep it going, because they virtually have nothing, virtually no medicine, and don't have any of the equipment that they need. It's available on the black market, so people have to bring it in themselves. So it's in real trouble, and it's definitely getting worse.
Yeah, Stuart, I mean, it was grim listening to that doctor. He told me when people come in with fractures or broken limbs, they always have to improvise using wood or cardboard, whatever they can find. And he told me, he said, there was a time where we would travel around the world training other hospitals, bringing doctors to our country to train those doctors. It was the pride of this nation and the revolution here, but obviously after decades of sanctions, it is going to have an impact. But as you say, since the beginning of the year, when Donald Trump put that really strict oil blockade on this country, you're seeing this place literally crumble within 6 or 7 months. The president said to me, just imagine, for a month or two, London faces this kind of blockade. What do you think would happen to your city? We've been living under sanctions for decades, and this sort of crippling blockade for the last 6 or 7 months. So we are doing what we can, but we're left with literally nothing.
That's right. And the question then is, what can they do? What can they offer to President Trump to perhaps get that embargo lifted? We know they were hoping the United Nations is going to consider the continuing problems for Cuba in the coming days. America has said it's not particularly keen on taking part in any discussion with the United Nations about this, but that is what they're hoping, is that international support will help them. Critically, I think that the president Trump wants to see regime change as opposed to just regime compliance, which is what we've got with Venezuela, for example. But the Cuban government is making it clear that that is a red line for them, because it is the revolution, it is still in place, and they will choose their own leadership. And as I said, I think quite a lot of people who don't agree with the government do accept that basic principle that you can't have the United States coming in and just imposing a new order on them. And that, after so long, decades and decades of that, this regime, if for the want of a better expression, would be incredibly difficult to change simply overnight. I think the sense I get, people want an evolution to take place where they can become much more part of the Caribbean again, and that they can have an economy that works properly with relaxation of the strict socialist principles that are in place, even if they are being slightly loosened now. But we're nowhere near where that is, and President Trump is making it clear that he is not relaxing this embargo whatsoever. In fact, things could get worse, and we know that some new sanctions have been put in place. For the time being, Cuba really is in a difficult situation, and they don't know what President Trump is going to do next.
Thank you, Stuart, so much for all of your reporting from Cuba. Well, you can watch my full interview with the Cuban president. It's on the Sky News YouTube page. But for now, from me and the team from Havana, goodbye.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming. It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.